Hello all, this is James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade, and I'm here to do a review video of Greedfall. Greedfall is an RPG that released yesterday, September 9th at 3 p.m. on Steam Pacific Standard Time. It's a good game. I find it quite fun, very entertaining. One of the better games I've played lately. But it's not perfect. So let's go over some of the things to do with Greedfall, shall we? I think maybe I'll start with the pros, things that I find best about the game itself. And then we will talk about the cons. So on the pros side, it's got quests that are not just about killing people. The quests they revolve around stuff that's more than just go here, kill these people, go here, kill that many goblins, go kill that, go kill that. The quests are far more fleshed out. The quests don't necessarily revolve around combat at all, and for me that's a big plus. I'm not a fan of an RPG that only knows one thing, and that's the combat system inside of the game. A game should be more than just combat, and I feel like Greedfall has accomplished that. It's done a good job in creating quests that can be accomplished in more than one way. You can do some of the quests through combat. You can do some of the quests through stealth. You can do some of the quests through diplomacy. You can do some of the quests through lockpicking or through some sort of scientific achievement. Or there's more than one way to skin a cat in the majority of the quests in Greedfall. And for that, I'm very appreciative, and I think that's a big pro for the game. So that goes into another one of my pros, is that much of the game doesn't revolve around combat, and I strongly appreciate that in an RPG. I want a game that's more realistic. That, you know, when we live life, we're not going out and looking at our neighbor and saying, okay, we got to punch him, kill him, whatever. You know, when we go to the grocery store, we're not wondering if the other people there shopping are going to try to kill us. You know, life is about far more than combat, and a game world should be similar if it's going to be interesting and realistic, especially in an RPG environment. You have to have far more to the environment than mindless violence. Another pro that I find is that it's got a pretty good storyline. It uses a lot of historical concepts. So we have three main factions. Well, we have five factions really in the game. We have pirates, which are called naughts, which are they're not necessarily pirates. They're more like seagoing people that are very nautical. They're very inspired upon their lives in the sea, and they have some pirate-like tendencies, but they don't seem to be completely criminal. They seem to be merchants and the whole range of people. So they're kind of interesting in that they kind of have filled in a niche in the world of being basically like the transportation system or the suppliers of merchandise between some of the other factions. And so they've almost become symbiotic with most all the other factions. So in a way, they're almost like the most peaceful faction in the world, in that everyone needs them, or they're not going to be able to travel anywhere, because the Naughts are the people with the ships, and in order to get anywhere, you have to use the knots in order to get there. So it makes an interesting dynamic for their faction. Then you have a faction that seems to be very um, Mid-Eastern, Muslim, maybe type faction that revolves around scientific achievement and knowledge. Um, they don't seem to be fanatical followers of a religion. They seem to be, at least to what I've seen so far, fairly non-zealous. They follow science more than they follow religion. So they're kind of like the scientific faction, um, but still they are to an extent human beings. They have their own uh, needs, desires, wants, things that are best for their people, and thus intrigue that suits their people. Then you also have I think of them as the Spanish. This is a group of very zealot-like, um, religion-following, conquistador-like people who were the first of the Continentals to come to this island inhabited by natives. Um, they they feel very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very zealot-like. And of the groups, they are probably, well, we're not going to get into the cons yet, but they're fairly fleshed out and they make sense from a large historical overarching concepts to allow the gamer to kind of get engaged in the game. We can draw upon things that have happened in history, and that's what they've done in this game, obviously. And then you have the faction that you're part of, which is the congregation, and you're evidently a continental group that isn't as zealot-like as the Spanish, we'll call them, or as scientific as the Middle Easterners. You're somewhere in between. You're a middle of the road type group. We don't really get a very strong feeling of what the congregation is because we play as the congregation. If anything, it feels like the congregation are the good guys. Um, though there's a tangled weave of stuff that's going on in the congregation around you, and part of the storyline is discovering that there is some nasty human activities that are all around you, even within your own faction, and you start to discover some of these things as you're doing the side quests. Um, I can't speak to the entirety of the game because I haven't played all the way through it yet, but I've played enough hours at this point that I feel I've got a good concept of whether or not the game's fun and whether or not um, the game is buggy, whether or not the game is enjoyable, and the the easy pros and cons that you can figure out from playing a game. I think the graphics are more than adequate. I'm not really a person that requires really good graphics though. So for me, any game is typically graphically fine, this one is beautiful as far as I'm concerned. I have no issues with being immersed in this environment. I have no issues with the graphics. The gameplay I've found has been very smooth, though some of the controls are a bit clunky. Um, your movement's a little weird. Your naturally in this kind of a jogging state, and unless you press the Z key to then walk, uh, you end up jogging most everywhere. Walking feels more immersive. I tend to do a lot of walking in the game because it allows me to immerse myself better. The jogging just really kind of ruins the immersion for me. Though the walking is kind of slow to do some things, and so you end up running oftentimes because you're just trying to get on to the next stage of the game, if you will. Okay, so those are some of the easy to point out pros in the game. Now let's start pointing out some of the cons. One of the biggest cons I find with this game is that it's instanced and on rails. So what I mean by that is, let's take you to the map here. This is a travel point, right? Okay, and so specific travel points, depending on where you are, will allow you to travel to different locations. Um, these locations are not always unlocked, meaning depending on how far you are in the story, there may just be these two places unlocked. There may just be these three places unlocked. And as the story unfolds, you discover new locations. Well, that's on rails. That is a storyline that's not optional. It's a storyline that's mandatory in order to get to the next part of the experience. So this is very much an instance type theme park ride. And it's obviously instance, as in all of these locations are their own instance maps. And when you travel to them, you then zone into them. So it's an instanced on rails experience. And that's a big drawback for the game, really. Because well, that just feeds into one of the next big problems with the game, and that's that it's not an open world. It's not a sandbox. And so, because there is no sandbox, there's no exploration. Um, the exploration is really non existent in the game because the game mainly revolves around going accomplishing quests, then accomplishing the next quest, and accomplishing the next quest. There's no time to do something for yourself that doesn't revolve around the quest because that type of gameplay does not exist in the game. There is no non-questing gameplay. There is no I just want to go fishing or I want to cut down a tree and build a house. There is no experience like that that revolves outside of the premise of the quest line. And so from that point, you're very much in an instance on rails, non sandbox world that has really nothing to do outside of the quests. And this is all very much a con, in my opinion. Sandboxes like Skyrim and Kingdom Come Deliverance are far more replayable. They'll always be far more replayable because it's up to me and my imagination what I'm going to do when I load up that game and play it. Maybe I just want to go hunt deer and be a poacher that day. Maybe I want to go fishing. The the things I want to do, I can do because I'm not trapped on a theme park type ride. I don't have to ride the merry-go-round in order to get to the carousel that then allows me to get to the roller coaster that will drop me off at the rocket ship type experience, which is what this game is. Um, but at the same time, this game has actual an actual ending. And there's multiple different endings that you can have based off of your choices of the quest line. So the quests have choices. It's almost like a going through and doing a choose your own adventure book, or a telltale game where you decided to go this path instead of this path and make this choice instead of this choice. Um, Actually, the game, I think that this, in a way, this game most resembles the Council. I really enjoyed the Council, and I think that this game and the Council have a lot of things in common. Um, just from the concept of your choices matter. But there is a problem with this game compared with the Council. The Council was very gray. The game was very gray, and you could play the game in multiple different styles because it was easy to role play the different styles. So maybe one time in the Council you decided to side with your mother. Maybe one time in the Council you decided to not side with your mother. Maybe one time in the Council you decided to, whatever. There were different ways of going through the Council, and it wasn't hard to take that path because the the story was gray enough that you weren't necessarily the good guy or the bad guy, no matter how you went. But in this game, there are multiple paths, but the story is not gray. It's black and white. And so when you have the option to join with the lunatic zealot like Spanish Inquisitor, you're like, yeah, right, I'm not a psychopath. I'm not going to do that. So it, because the story presents itself in such a black and white fashion, you almost would never possibly choose the ultra bad paths, and thus you lose a lot of replayability because who wants to play as a psychopath? It's one thing to play as a person with hard choices, like if we're watching the TV show The 100, right? And Bellamy Blake has to choose between his sister and killing a couple hundred random people that have been trying to kill him. It's there's not one real good option there, but he decides an option based off of his morality and the sets of things that are presented before him at the time, and it might not be the best option according to some of the other people watching, but for him it works. That's kind of like the Council. The Council is, you can put yourself into different gray matters, and you can justify your various different paths through the game, where I don't feel like you can make a justifiable way of pathing through this game as some of the options that are unfold before you, because some of the options that unfold before you just, if you were to to join the bad guy, you're a bad guy, and unless you're absolutely willing to just say, like, I'm going to be a psychopath this run and I'm going to be a bad guy and I'm going to play the bad guy run, then maybe that's something that you want to do. Maybe that is entertaining, but I don't think a lot of us really get into playing the psychopath. I don't know. Maybe I'm just rambling and I'm not making sense, but that is one of the problems I feel with the multiple storylines in this game, is that the game itself is black and white. It's not gray enough to allow you to go with multiple paths. And thus the replayability is not as replayable because there's only so many ways to play the hero. Anyway, we'll move on to the next con of the game. Boss battles. So there are junctures in this game where you end up, you can't progress the main storyline until you accomplish a fight that is, well, particularly difficult or really difficult, depending on the make and build of your character. Some character builds are really good for fighting, and other character builds not so much, which is fine because that's actually a positive for an RPG. RPG should allow you many different ways of getting through the game, and one of those paths should be without combat. But when you throw in boss battles on that path in the RPG where you cannot progress past that boss battle without fighting the fight, now your weak character that you've purposely made weak because you've invested more into non combat skills is now at a serious disadvantage when he's attempting to win this combat that is required to be beaten in order to progress the story. And so I think some of the boss battles in this game were not really well thought out. And that then brings me into difficulty levels. There is a very strange difficulty leap between easy and normal. Um, there's about a 2,000% difficulty leap between easy and normal. On easy, the game is so unbelievably easy that it's almost impossible to lose any fight, even against the hardest mob in the game. Which is fine, and it's probably the way I recommend playing this game, because the combat isn't that great. And there's nothing wrong with that, because like I've been saying through this entire review, a game should be about more than combat, and this game does a good job of being about more than combat. It really does. So I strongly recommend playing this game on easy mode, because the strengths of this game is the story. The strengths of the game is playing through this almost as if it's a Telltale type storyline game, because there is a good story here for you to play through. So there's that. The combat itself isn't very engaging or fun. It's overly complex than it needs to be, and it's hidden in a very clunky UI. The combat is very what's the word I'm looking for? Obtuse. The you have this tactical pause, and you got layers upon layers of menus within the tactical pause, and it's just very clunky. And so the more difficult combat just becomes an exercise in really mastering a clunky UI, and doesn't really enhance the game, because if you do manage to accomplish mastering the clunky UI and you kill those guys the same as if you would have killed them if you were on easy combat, it really doesn't change your game experience. It's not like mastering this clunky UI makes the game feel more fun. It doesn't. It just feels like a needless exercise in complexity. And so ignore trying to master the clunky combat system. Just play it on easy mode, and enjoy the game for the story, because there's a good story here to be had, and it's well worth the purchase for the story alone. So those are my simple takeaway pros and cons that I've seen while playing the game. This game, for me, if I was to rate it out of 10, I would put it at like a 7.5. I find the game to be enjoyable. And if the game is enjoyable and it's a game that when I wake up, I want to turn the computer on and I want to play it some more after playing it for 10 hours the day before, Well, that's at least a 7 in my book. And this is one of those games where I played it for 10 hours yesterday. I woke up today and I wanted to turn it on and I wanted to play it some more. So there's at least, enough. How do I put this? Intoxication of the game, enough enjoyment in the game to make me want to play multiple days in a row, many hours in a row. So that means that it's a fun game. And this is ultimately the most important thing I rate a game off of is the game fun? Do I want to play it again? Do I want to play it again? That's the most important thing that I judge my game reviews off of is, do I want to play it? I know it's a very simple thing to judge a game off of, but I want to play this game again. So it has to be at least a 7 out of 10 in my rating scale for that to be the case. Things underneath 7 are games that I might want to play on the off chance that I want to torture myself in whatever exercise that game provides. Like, what are some games that are in this niche that are under 7, but I will still play them every now and then? Um, House Flipper. Maybe I might feel the urge that I want to uh, remodel a house. House Flipper is good for that. It's a game that it, it it covers an urge, and then once I play House Flipper and I remodel the house, I remember just how horribly grindy and lengthy and long the game is to get anything accomplished. And all for what, really, at the end of the day? What was the point of the game? The economy in it is so easy. The the game lacks a lot of replayability features, but from one particular point of view, the game is pretty enjoyable. And so for me, House Flipper is the type of game that I would rate like a 6 out of 10 or a 6.5, something like that. It's not a 7 because it doesn't demand me to play it multiple hours, multiple days in a row. So I've rated this at a 7.5 out of 10, which is a good rating. That's because it's a good game. It's got a fun factor, I think, of at least a good 30 consecutive hours. I don't think I'm going to be getting tired of playing it until I've played at least, you know, 3 or 4 days at 8 to 10 hour sessions. And at that point, I probably have finished the game anyway. So I think this is a really good RPG. It's got just the right amount of content and just the right amount of staying power to be worth a buy and get you through a good, enjoyable story without being too long. So a lot of RPGs, in my opinion, are just too long. Um, you enjoy them for a few sessions and then you save up and you go play something else and you end up coming back to that game a month or two later and you don't know where you left off in the game, so you don't even bother loading that save up. You start a new game, you get to about the same place through the experience and you end up getting bored of it again, and so you never actually accomplish the game. um, but you do enjoy it, but you never finish the experience. And that's a lot of RPGs. There's a lot of RPGs like that. And well, I don't think I don't think this is going to be one of those. I think I might actually make it through this game in one sitting, if you will, one attention span. Yeah, that's a good way to call it. This game is probably good for a one attention span playthrough and actually being able to get through it. So with that being said, I do recommend Greedfall. I think it's worth the money. At the same time, Greedfall is not Skyrim. It's not Kingdom Come Deliverance. It's just not on that level. Skyrim, Kingdom Come Deliverance are 9 out of 10s. This is a 7.5. So while this is a game worth buying and worth enjoying the experience, is it a masterpiece like Skyrim and Kingdom Come Deliverance? No. Is it an above average RPG? Yes. And so ultimately, that's what I feel about Greedfall. I think Greedfall is a quite enjoyable game. You should all give it a try. However, if you're a combat-oriented person, combat's the most important thing in your game, and it's what drives your game, then you should probably avoid Greedfall. But if you're a player that prefers things that have nothing to do with combat, you enjoy storyline over combat, you enjoy the trip, then Greedfall might be your thing. However, if you're a person that doesn't do well in a instance theme park and you need the wide open experience of a sandbox or else you feel trapped, um, and you don't want to be confined to the one path the developers had laid out before you, then you may not like Greedfall as much. But what I will tell you is that Greedfall does a good job of making uh, that singular path that you end up taking through the world feel like an enjoyable experience. So while I'm not a big fan of theme parks and I'm not a big fan of games that are on a rail, um, this game masks the rail well enough that I am still able to enjoy the experience. So anyway, I am James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade. This is my content. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe. And until next time, all, peace.